Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Process. On today's episode, we have a pair of frequent collaborators from All of Us Strangers, writer-director Andrew Haigh and the editor Jonathan Alberts.
Hello and welcome to The Process. My name is Andrew Haigh and I am the writer and director of All of Us Strangers. And with me today is Jonathan Alberts, my long-term editor and friend who edited this film and almost everything else I've done. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Where are you?
I'm in LA and you're in
Oh,
London. So we're separated by the Atlantic.
yes, we are.
So how should we start? Let's start with when we first met each other.
Oh,
You
that
remember
day.
that important earth-shattering
I
day?
I do remember that, but I think actually we should start like a little bit before that
Okay.
because I think what's kind of most interesting is that, of course I knew you before I met you, naturally. But I think what's kind of interesting is that I think the first thing I knew of you was like when I saw the trailer for Weekend when I was, in LA. I guess that would have been what 2011 or end of 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think actually the truth is Weekend was on the festival circuit when I had a film on this festival circuit. So I think we both had films and I'd heard about Weekend. And then I saw the trailer and I was like, I got to see that movie. I have to see that movie. And I did see that movie and I saw it, I think, a couple times in the theater and dragged a few friends to see it because it was amazing and brilliant. And I thought, I want to work with that guy. But I was like, how am I going to work with that guy? I'm in LA, you're in London. I was just like, it'll never happen. And then I think one day I got a call.
Yeah. And so I was doing Looking, which is an HBO show at the time, and just after Weekend. And yeah, I was over and we were looking for editors. Um, and I think you were one of the first people I spoke to from my memory. Um, but I remember you coming in. It's so funny now that I know you and we know each other so well. I can't quite imagine what it was like when I first met you that time. But obviously you said something right because we've worked together for 10 years. But I think I could just, whenever you meet, it seemed like crazy, which I'd really loved. But then talking to you, you know quite quickly when you actually like someone and you want your collaborators to be people that you like. And I think we had a shared understanding of the things we wanted to do and the films we wanted to make. So I guess that was we offered
Yeah.
you the job pretty much there
And
and
that
then.
was to do that was to do the pilot because we hadn't, gotten the series greenlit yet. But I think then we went and did the pilot and we then did the series. That was like our first collaboration.
Yeah. And then we worked on
Yeah.
that, and then 45 years came up while we were still working on Looking. So I remember I was in the
Mhm.
writers' room on season 2, and you were editing, and then in the afternoons I would come in and be in the edit room with you, editing that film. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And then we'd gone to England to shoot it and then came back. I think it was just for that 5, 6 week shoot, probably,
yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah. And
and it's
then
yeah, because
yeah.
as an editor, it's a weird thing. I think the relationship between a director and editor is such a weird one because you sort of need them to start to be able to read your mind in a way that is slightly different with other department heads. I think you're stuck in a room, the two of you, for a very, very, very long time, and so I always think it's quite it's intense relationship. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it feels in some ways like I feel like when I'm meeting people to, work on them with the film, it's a bit of a personality test versus, I mean, you're talking about the script and the project, of course, but I think it is the director being like, can I sit in a room for like 7 months with this person? And I think it's important. I mean, you have to have a similar sensibility or shared sensibility, at least about the project you're working on. And you kind of want to like that person. You kind of want to know, it feels like, that they have the kind of taste that, you can respect and like.
I think on the whole we have the same taste. Sometimes we disagree on a few films, but
You
but on the whole, I think like when we've been to festivals and we've seen films, we usually come out of that film going, "I love that," or like, "Why does everyone else love that? We don't love that." So I think there's a
Yeah.
shared uh yeah passion for the same kind of films.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think it inspires. I think talking about films and it inspires a lot of conversations. I mean, I was thinking about it's interesting because I was just looking earlier on about the list of films that you had given me for All of Us Strangers. And, it's films that kind of have cropped up over the years. I mean, one of them, of course, is Cries and Whispers, which I know you love, and talk about it a lot and think about it a lot. And it being a huge inspiration for All of Us Strangers in a way.
Which is funny, isn't it? Because it's such a different film. Like it's not
Yeah.
like you wouldn't look at Strangers and be like, oh, it's reminds me of Cries and Whispers. But I don't know, there was something when I go to that film a lot when I'm trying to do something that feels like it's emotional and painful and all of those things. I mean, Bergman's such a master at that kind of small chamber piece type drama. What else is on my list? Can you remember what else was on the list?
So I remember I went and watched them all. Black Swan, Love is the Devil, because we are all the bigness. It's funny. I was talking to somebody yesterday who saw the film, and they were like, "Oh my god, I loved it when Adam is in the subway and stuff, and it's all very like Francis Bacon and stuff." Well, that's written into the script. That was exactly as intended. It was kind of nice to see that somebody had gotten those references. But Loveless was one. Enter the Void. Possession, Jacob's Ladder, Rosemary's Baby.
It's so funny. Like, I think when you're coming up with films to think about, it's not so much, is it, that you want the films to, you're not trying to find a film that our film will be like. So it's not a direct thing. It's just about starting a conversation. It's like, for example, putting like Jacob's Ladder and Rosemary's Baby. It's like, okay, how much do we want to lean into the genre within this film? Is that what we want to lean into? Maybe not. And we didn't in the end lean too much into genre, but you could have done. And then you choose something like Loveless, and I like the editorial style of that film. And so there's lots of different things that you look at for different reasons. And really, it's just about starting conversations, isn't it? Because that's almost the hardest thing. It's like you're trying to say to someone else, can you just get into my head and look about what I'm looking at the moment and thinking about, and try and understand that so we know how to go forward.
Well, I always find that super helpful. I mean, I think the two things that you do that I find super helpful is, you come up with, it's like two of the other films were Solaris, and you were talking specifically about memory and how memory is dealt with in Solaris and Blow Up and The Wind in the Trees, which, we have a little bit of, I think it's always this sense of conversation. I think the other thing you do too often is, you have a playlist of things, and then you gave me a bunch of stuff that you were writing with at the time, which is really helpful. And I mean, I think for most people, that playlist would be like, well, this is just a bunch of like, fridges buzzing, it's very minimalist, ambient kind of music, that I think a lot of people would just not think is quite inspirational, maybe. But I love it when you give me
we had like lots of Elaine
Radigue,
didn't we? Elaine Radigue and
yeah,
like all that kind of, and it's long tonal things that I write to when I'm writing, because I can't have too much music playing, but I want something in the background. And so they feed into the script and they feed into, what we end up, how we end up thinking about it.
I mean, that's so helpful though for me, because then as an editor, it's like I'm just trying to get into your head, because usually you just don't have the opportunity to sit down. I mean, and after we certainly talk a lot about the script, when I first read the script and you'd given it to me, I mean, it was great to talk about, okay, what's the idea? You have the references, I have the music, talking about what is this going to feel like? What's the tone going to feel like? And it felt to me too, like what you were trying to do was trying to do something different, a little different than what you've done before, within the same like Andrew Haigh kind of family, but certainly something that wasn't exactly what you were comfortable with, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's certainly one of the things that scared me about it. It's like usually my films are pretty based within a grounded reality. And so trying to make something that was taking off from reality pretty quickly within the story was certainly a little bit nerve-wracking. It's funny, like also, you remember the conversation that we had, I think it was after we'd done the North Water, and you were like, so I think your next film should be something really emotional, Andrew. Really like get into the emotion. I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to Jonathan and see if I can do that. But it was interesting, that process of trying to like push the emotion even in the script. And I remember when you first read it, you had definitely a kind of visceral emotional reaction to it, and you know it's nice when you've written something to feel like that is having that effect on someone.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, I really did. I mean, it's interesting, just because having spent so much time with you in the cutting room and outside of the cutting room too. I mean, having a friendship, and we end up talking a lot about all different things, both aspects of our lives and film and everything. And I think it was pretty interesting to read that script coming from you, and it felt like it was part of the things that we'd been talking about growing up in the 80s, growing up gay, kind of growing up with the specter of AIDS happening and trying to like deal with all sorts of feelings of grief or trauma and shame and all of these things. And I think when I read it, I was pretty floored. Not that it had come out of you, but that you'd brought it together in such a way that was, I mean, it was super moving in the script. I mean, I think it's rare that you read a script. I mean, oftentimes I'll read a novel, and I'll feel a really strong emotional reaction, to it. But that doesn't often happen in a script. And I think I think it was, yeah, really beautifully written, and you could feel it on the page for sure. And I mean, that was super exciting. I mean, as an editor, I mean, that's amazing.
You were and it was interesting because it's always I was always quite apprehensive when I was putting the script out into the world, because it felt like it comes from personal place. I think anyone that sort of knows me can feel me within the story quite a lot. So it's quite a nerve-wracking space to be in. But I remember when I sent it to you, you've never been so excited with a project that I've sent you before. There was like, you're coming up with all kinds of thoughts and ideas and music stuff that you were listening to and conversations that you had with your parents and, and all kinds of things that definitely fed into the script too.
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting because, you don't make films alone, you make them with other people. So so to have that passion is, gets you through over a lot of the bumps of your sort of self-doubt as you're going down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. And I think what is so nice is that, you really, I think, and I've seen it in all departments, is that you really let people into that as well. I mean, you certainly have your opinions, absolutely. But you kind of have this openness about like, okay, let's try this. And whether we're in the cutting room or whether it is like, a piece of music, or what if we just try this? I mean, there's never a feeling that is like not part of what you intended, or it's super refreshing. You don't get that all the time, so super helpful.
But it is because you like sometimes we like to think that we know everything as directors and writers, and of course you don't. And so as you're going down the process, I mean, we know, even just on a basic sense, you can be like, oh, we need that scene to stay. That scene's really important. And you keep it in and you keep it in and you keep it in. And then you're like, well, should we just try and take it out? And then you take it out and you're like, why the hell didn't we take it out 5 months ago? It's so perfect that we took it out because it makes a different connection within the scene before and the scene after that was lacking before, and something new has come out. So you've got to take those risks, because sometimes you can be quite defensive about not wanting to listen to any other ideas, but it's always going to, it's never going to work. You should listen to those ideas.
Yeah. I mean, do you remember when we had that early conversation? I think this was before we started cutting. I think we said, okay, we're going to make sure that every single scene is like exactly how it should be, in terms of we should not have any questions about a scene being there or being different. And, we were cutting over about a year. I don't think the expectation for us was that we were going to be cutting over a year, but I think we ended up trying so many different things. And I think actually it was quite a luxury, and it was quite great to have that amount of time, because we found the economy of the whole film in that time. But I think too, it's easy sometimes to just kind of live with a scene that is working really well, but then actually to take that scene and be like, okay, what if we actually just like completely toss this up in the air in certain parts, which part of you feels like, oh no, but it's working so well. And it's great. I think the club scene is a great idea of that in All of Us Strangers. I think, when Adam and Harry are in the bathroom and take the drugs, I mean, that whole section is such a long and, it's a pretty crazy section that doesn't really land for quite a while. And I think, that was a big section in trying to understand, like, well, what if we just recut the club and recut this? It's not like a simple process just to say, let's tear it apart, or let's lose the bar scene, which was never in the film. Let's lose, like, we had all that karaoke stuff that,
like, it's so funny.
Andrew and Paul were singing, that we were just like, no, this is going to be in it. And none of that stuff is in it. But it was certainly a process of finding that.
Yeah. And it can be quite, and especially when you're like using a lot of music and you're cutting to music and lots of things work really well, you're like, okay, but it looks amazing and sounds amazing, but is it doing the right thing story-wise? And is that affecting the scene to come when he wakes back up in the house? Like, are we spending too long with this? So now we're bored by the time we get to that. And there's so many questions you go, and also it's funny with the long process of editing. Like, this has definitely been longer, but it's also because we had to do a preview, for example, and that takes up so much time. It's I've never done one before, and they're not the funnest of things, let's just say.
No, that wasn't your most enjoyable moment, was it?
That wasn't my most enjoyable moment. It's funny, like, in retrospect, I understand why they happen. I understand the point of them. The reality of being in them is an unusual process, and I feel like so much time gets dedicated to gearing up to the preview. You have to do like a temp mix, and you're editing not for the final film almost. You're editing for that preview. It's a strange thing. It takes like months out of a schedule almost.
I know, it feels absolutely. I mean, that preview was. It's a weird experience. I always describe it as like it's medicine. It tastes bad, but it's good for you. And I think ultimately, weirdly, I think it was good for us in a sense that, forcing ourselves to sit there in front of an audience. I mean, whether or not you feel that way in the end, but I think as an editor, it's like, I mean, I want to think that we can just create the film, like the two of us can just get in there and cut it. But, you have so many collaborators and Searchlight and Film 4 and all of these people came in who were super dedicated to the film and were really interested in the film and were really behind it. But I think as an editor, you're never looking to an audience to say, like, this is what it should be, but you're kind of always trying to read what's the note between the note, because I don't really like the note, but there's something about what they're saying that is telling me something of what the film might need to include or exclude.
And I think also the trick of it is ignoring the things that are unimportant or that are coming from people that would never go and see the film anyway. So, there's no denying that we didn't have some people who didn't want to see any of the sex and actually got up and left the cinema as the first sex scene happened. And, you look back at the feedback and it's like, is there anything, they're like, oh, we don't like the gay stuff. So you're like, well, okay, there's nothing we can do about that. Yeah, there's nothing we can do about that. So, but it's important, but you're in a fragile process when you're previewing, because there's a lot of people that you're trying to, make happy with what the product is, with what the film is. So you've got to listen to as you say, listen between the lines sometimes, and only take. I mean, look, I feel like the good thing is that Searchlight were and Blueprint very behind making the film that we wanted to make, not making the film that would necessarily make the most money or whatever it would be. And so that's good to know. So I feel like we were always allowed to make the decisions, even if we were going to fall on our own sword, it would be our decision, which was good.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think at the end, and what I always talk to directors and what I always say to directors when we're always going back and forth, like, at the end of the day, it's you that has to stand up for the film, so you have to be behind it, and it's tough when you have a lot of voices and things are going on. But I think also as an editor, it's like you want to be a champion for the director and for the project, and you can't help but to fall in love with the project on some level, regardless of how, what it might look like in the end. I think, so it was quite nice actually that, All of Us Strangers is getting this kind of crazy response. I mean, I think, which neither of us would really ever assume would happen. I think we don't we give ourselves a very long leash to say like, well,
I was
look,
gonna
I
like
mean,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think
I
we
think it's
both
because
come at it with
you invest so personally in it, and when you feel like it's a story that does sort of speak about you as well, you kind of, well, nobody's going to like that. You know, it speaks to your worst instincts of sort of like not liking yourself very much. So it's a really tricky thing, and also as time goes by, you can't you're torn between being more confident that the film is getting better, but being slightly less confident that, oh my god, the release is coming out, what are people going to think? And it can be a really, again, a sort of bumpy time, and like you're making those final decisions and suddenly post starts accelerating, and you're doing
yeah.
more composing and lots of music's coming in and visual effects are coming in and you're mixing. And this mix was a bit messy. We had to do it in 3 different mix locations, which is really complicated, something I'd never want to do again, because you're hearing the film in 3 very different venues, and so your ears are like, I don't know what's the thing I'm supposed to be using as my reference. And all those things happen very, very quickly. Like, we didn't finish, the DCP wasn't complete until like 2 days before Telluride.
Yeah.
We were still, and even after Telluride, we were going in and there was a few mix changes that you're drastically trying to do just before it can get done for the next screening at New York or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I think we were even doing picture changes like 2 weeks before the TCP of Telluride. I mean, I think that was kind of interesting because usually on in the films and the TV shows we do, it's like once we lock it, we go to mix and then we've mixed it. And I think this was a different process a little bit in that we kept tweaking to make sure, like, we're just going to keep going. If we're in the middle of the mix and we need to change the picture, we need to change the picture. And I know that happens all the time on films, but I think there was just a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross in terms of getting through that. But
also, because we knew that making this film, like, the sound was so important, the music was so important. Like, you do so much work anyway in the edit about crafting a soundscape for the film. I don't like looking at an edit without the sound being good, at least, or because I know how much it can do to bring the piece to life and make you feel the deeper emotions of what you're trying to say story wise. So then when you get into the sound mix, you're like, oh, actually the picture can change now, because the sound, when it's now complete, it works. And so, like, I always think I mean, me, we've worked together long enough to know that whenever I finish something, I'm like, next time I want to do it like this. I want the sound department on board from the beginning, because it makes so much difference and it should inform the edit. And you wish you could have the composer on from day one, so that can inform the edit. Because the idea that these things are all separate doesn't make any sense. They're all connected together, whether it's music, sound, picture. So you want to be working on them editorially really all together rather than keeping them like segmented.
But I think too, it's just like modern filmmaking and the global nature of what it's become is, divided these departments in a way. So your sound can be over here, like everybody can be all over the place. Whereas I think, decades ago, and not even as much as decades ago, it was a different thing, because you had your teams much closer together and people had to communicate in a way that they don't anymore. And I think it is important. I mean, I think in post and editorial, it is important to kind of create something that feels, what's the word? Just
unified or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because also it is like, it's also coming, both of us have worked in like the lower budget levels of films. So when you do that, there is so much, you have to just lock the picture and then that's it. And then you have to give it to sound and then you have to give it to thing. Like on really, really big budget movies, they're doing temp mixes throughout the whole experience of it. And you realize the more you work, how important that can be. So it's often just a kind of financial thing as well, because, money's tight. You can't just be in a screening room the whole time. I mean, I would love to be able to edit, I would, with a cinema screen, instead of just, a big TV, because it does make a difference. Suddenly you're in the mix and you're like, oh, watching it now on a big screen, you can trim this cut. We don't need, or it needs to be longer. We actually, doing the mix, we actually made things a bit longer, some of the cuts, didn't we, I think?
Yeah, no, we did. We lengthened some things because we felt like, okay, actually, we can support it now, the picture supports it. So it was finding that. One thing I was going to ask you, I mean, so in terms of the creative process, in terms of the writing, in terms of in production through post-production, like, you're talking about it being so scary. Like, what was the scariest thing for you in terms of that? Like, what felt so scary about bringing All of Us Strangers to life?
I guess it's like, even though, it's not an autobiographical story. I mean, obviously I haven't met ghosts, in my real life. But there is like, you know me, like, and people who know me know how much of me is within the film. So I think you have to sort of like, that's a nerve-wracking process, because you're essentially saying, if you don't like this, I'm going to feel like it means you don't like me, on a very basic personal level. So to put it out there you feel like you're in a vulnerable spot when it's nothing to do with your life, but when it's something to do with your life, I shot the film in my childhood home. That's where I grew up for like the first 7 years of my life. All of those choices and things that are in the script that are very personal to me, when you put them out into the world, you've got to be prepared for the world to decide whether they like that or not. So I think that feels like it comes from a vulnerable place.
It's funny because I feel like when I read the script, it felt like, I remember saying to you, it's just like, oh, thanks for writing a script about me. And I think it was kind of an interesting thing because, and in a way, it's like, that kind of time that we grew up in the 80s and all of that stuff, I think it had such a strong effect, particularly on, gay and queer kids, in terms of, feeling shame and trauma and all of these kinds of things, let alone maybe the grief and the loss that, is with the family story. But I think, the best thing as an editor is to work on something where it kind of scared me as well, in terms of how personal it felt, in terms of the experience of Adam's journey.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so good. Like that, it was almost liberating to me to know that it also felt like a personal story to other people. We are the same age. We've both experienced loss, and we know what that's like, and all of these things are part of our lives. And so it is good to collaborate with people that sort of just get it. And also, it just made me feel like, because the story's not about me, but it's about how I feel about things, and to connect with other people and them say, oh, do you know what? This feels like it's written about me, or Emily, the composer, or Jamie, the DP. It felt like it spoke to them on a profound level too. It's kind of freeing because you realize that you've done something that works because it's speaking to other people too.
Yeah, and I remember feeling that when we were shooting when I was on set cutting, and all the execs would come in, and they were talking to me, and our collaborators, Blueprint, they would come in, and they were all talking to me about the script. And they're like, "Isn't the script amazing? Isn't the script amazing?" And I was like, "It is amazing. It is amazing." And I think what you've managed to do, what we've managed to do, it's kind of an incredible thing that it does work in this very niche level. And it also works on a very universal level. And I think, gay or straight or whatever it is, like older and younger, I think there's such an incredible feeling to be able to create something that does kind of touch all of those different things generationally. I mean, I think it's kind of one of the hardest things to do in film. I always think about, making stories that are very internal and making internal stories external, and how difficult that is to bring a visual language to that. There's a lot of shots, like in Adam's loneliness, all of those kinds of things that were written, but we're also tweaking with. Like, I mean, I'm thinking about the second shot of the film when Adam's just in front of the television, and thinking about what's on that television. I mean, what's on that television tells you what his life is like at that moment. And we just have a bunch of crap British television, but we have a lot of different.
Yeah, we had so many different shots. Yeah, we had so many, especially in the opening. We'd spend so long like working on getting the right opening, and we tried some restructuring, and we tried different things. And openings are always they're so difficult. Everyone's like, get to the story faster, get to it faster, and I understand it. So you spend so long like working on those things. But I think what's interesting about what you just said is like, I always feel that the more specific you can become about every single choice that you make within the story, the more that opens up actually to it becoming more universal. Because you go into a bedroom, and that bedroom is how I remember my bedroom. So an audience, when they watch it, they think of their own bedroom, even if it's different posters. It's just about, if you can really just fine tune everything, and then that is, I do think, is the way to unlock, the universal elements of the story. Because you don't want to just wallow in it being all about you. It's got to be open to other people too, and other people's experience.
Absolutely. But I think that's actually the tricky thing. I mean, I think that's the goal of so many filmmakers, and I think you can hit and miss that mark so often. But it's kind of incredible to, when we were crafting it, and that was the goal. I mean, I think, one of the interesting things editorially that has to do with that too is just Adam kind of slipping between these worlds of the 1980s and contemporary London. And, we wanted the audience to feel dislocated, but anchored and not mired in confusion, but consistently questioning, is this real? Is this not real? And I feel like you always want to have an audience ask those questions, and you want to keep them active and to keep putting the puzzle together. But when you're creating a film that is essentially a bit of a puzzle, it's always a question of, is this puzzle going to fit together? Because you can create a puzzle that doesn't quite fit together, and people are just like, I don't know what's going on. Too many questions, too much confusion. And oftentimes in early cuts of films, it can be that. And I think that's what's so delicate editorially about this film, is that, it can go so easily in the wrong direction.
You were always asking, I feel like, the questions about, are we pushing it too far or not enough? Like, are we allowing the audience to bring themselves to it, or are we now saying too much? And I think, like, a lot of the way that we work is you are always asking questions, watching a scene, like, what is this telling us? What are we feeling? Are we feeling too much now? Have we pushed the emotion too much? If we push the emotion too much here, like, have we lost it? Especially towards the end section of the film, we had a lot of, remember that scene in the bedroom before they go to the diner? There were so many versions of that scene, weren't there? About, like, how emotional should that be? Because you don't want to take, I know you were very right in thinking, I think, if you make that too emotional, there's nowhere to go for the next scene when they're in the diner.
Right. And I think, there was a lot of experimentation with that. I mean, a lot of experimentation. I mean, it's so funny because you watch that scene, the bedroom scene, when Adam wakes up after knocking the glass out. And it actually plays as quite a simple scene in terms of emotionally. But, for anybody to understand actually the trials that we went through of pushing that. I mean, there were so many nights that I stayed late in the cutting room. It's like, see you later. And then I spent hours like working on that scene and pushing it. And there wasn't a ton of coverage for that scene either, but you can never tell. And I think the beauty of filmmaking and kind of the movie magic is that scene feels just exactly what it should be. But you never see the work behind that, and you never see like the struggle behind that.
I mean, we had like, there was a little montage in there at one point. There was so many different, but that's what you have to do, because you're trying to work out, I guess, what are we saying here? What is so I remember you cut that a little sort of montage that was thinking about Harry, and it was very beautiful and it worked very nicely actually. And we decided it wasn't the right thing for it, but at the same time, it allowed us to understand what we need that moment in the scene to be. And so how can we structure the scene so we know that he's thinking about the love that he's starting to feel for Harry, all of those kind of things, and in the end, the scene's only got like 4 cuts or something, but it took so long to get to that level.
I know. I mean, that's what's crazy about it. And I think it's what's difficult, and I think it's kind of what's difficult sometimes about being an editor, is that so much of the work goes on behind the scene that you never see. The cinematography you see, and it's beautiful. The music you hear, and it sounds amazing. But, and I think directing is probably a little bit like this too, in the sense that, so much of the work you never end up seeing. And, we didn't work on this film cutting for a year because it was just, it was okay, it's all scripted, it's all done. I mean, you wrote a beautiful script, but that doesn't guarantee you create a beautiful movie. I mean, never. And every filmmaker knows that there's so many variables, trials and tribulations along the way. And I think it's super satisfying with All of Us Strangers to have kind of, I don't know, to at least now I've seen the film and have that kind of response and know that, okay, it's like all of that work that people don't see is feeling like simplicity in a kind of way. I think it's, I don't know, it's unique. It's I always think about it with, like, sports things where it's like people pull off the most amazing things and you're a bit like, oh, it's so easy, but it's just like, actually it's just hours and hours of practice over years and years and years. And it's nice when you have a movie that
the beam or something in gymnastics. It's
yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah.
No, it just seems like, oh, well, that's, yeah, well, she they know how to do that, or whatever it is. But I think a film like this that does have a complicated relationship with the audience is even more so, that because it's not straightforward. And I think people do come out with questions. People do have questions at a certain point, but I kind of feel like they all get answered enough. And I think that's something we talked about endlessly, and that there was tons of experimentation editorially just to understand, and for us to understand how much is enough, and how much is too much.
We wanted the audience to leave with questions, not be closed off with the film ending. So I think we always knew that there would be questions as people left the cinema, and that we wanted the film to live on and linger on in their minds, so that asking those questions reveals stuff about their own lives and stuff about their own story and stuff about the people they've loved in their lives and the people that they've lost in their lives. So thank you, Jonathan, for what a lovely chat. I imagine we will talk many times more. And yes, thank you. That was a great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for listening as well. I hope you managed to get to the end. If you got to the end, well done.